Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and as you can see, my little wormery jacket that I wear sometimes is hanging in front of the window. So there's a huge glare going right down onto the bench where we're going to be working. It was going to throw the camera off for sure, so I put that up there to block the light a little bit. Hopefully it works. And before we head over to the bench, I thought I'd really quickly show you the two systems we're going to be feeding today. They're the ones that you see right here next to each other. They're a pair of red wiggler bins that were paired up despite the huge gap in their ages. The older bin, that system's got 60 days in age over the younger bin. They're now 245 and 185 days of age. 245, I believe that's 35 weeks of age. We did a little flip-flopping on the older one over there. The older one, 2 visits ago, which was 26 days ago, we decided, why don't we let them begin foraging? And then last check-in 12 days ago, we said, forget the foraging. Let's give them some food. Let's get them back in the game. And today, again, we're going to feed them once again, but similar to like what we did last time. We're going to put bedding in the younger system, but not in the older system. So I thought we would also revert back to something that I've not done in a while, which is to bring the systems out one at a time rather than side by side at the same time. So we're going to actually begin with the older one first. Let's get it up on the bench and get to work. Before we get started, I thought I'd share some of the info about these systems, but I think we've covered most of it already. The ages of the bins, 12 days since the last check-in, kind of a false start on foraging, which we've since reverted back to just everyday feedings here again. Perhaps just the info up here remains untouched on, which is the number of feedings these systems have been fed already. This is the system here. The older one has been fed 21 times already. Feeding number 22 going in today, and the younger system has already been fed 15 times with number 16 going in today. So these plastic sheets, or these plastic bags, you can see where the old covers, how much more narrow they are than the new ones we put on last time. That was the other slight difference last time, was that we gave the system slightly larger plastic coverings in the hopes that maybe more of the surface of each of the systems would remain nice and damp and active to worm traffic, instead of being left to get a little bit arid and uncomfortable for worms to hang in. So I left these out on top to dry enough so that we can simply flake off any of this residual material that was still stuck to them. And now we can just simply retire these old plastic covers that had been used previously. And here I can see we've got the old feeding zone indicator that we laid out over where we last fed. I've got a couple more days worth of coffee here, which is including the filters. So I guess we can go ahead, and even though this system wasn't going to get any bedding material, perhaps we will give them one little tiny piece of bedding. This piece of paper right here can go in to accompany the feeding that we're giving them. The other bin, the younger bin, I've got all these soiled napkins and paper towels that are going to go in with the feeding as well. And in that case, too, we'll just recycle the old feeding zone indicator when we swap it out with a new one. You know, here in the old system, I was kind of wondering if it wouldn't be a bad idea to collect up old chunks of stuff like this, the corn cob. You know, maybe since I've already set the old feeding zone indicator aside to be used down in the feeding area, perhaps if we encounter any other larger bits of leftover food, we can set those aside too and try to keep them with the rest of the stuff that's going to be going down into the middle when we feed. If there's little things like this, the skins off of some tomatoes, perhaps even some of these skins off of some cantaloupe melon, those things, if they're just out and about throughout the material, I don't think they're going to last a whole lot longer. But if there's larger bits like those corn cob chunks, of which I'm sure there are going to be others, I thought maybe we can keep it with all the rest of the foods that we end up placing in there today. So I've pretty much, I think last time even mentioned how these leaf stems, I think these leaf stems were probably one of the main reasons I decided this system was going to go a little bit longer. Because it's hard to imagine that you would want to harvest a batch of castings only to have a whole bunch of leaf stems floating around in it. Feeling like, hey, why don't we just let the system go longer, I'm pretty sure that once those leaf stems go, this material will just look a lot more finished and fine. Here too, just another little chunk of corn cob. And I'm just kind of gently making my way down into the feeding area. I don't know why. Why don't we just dig in and see what's going on here? Definitely got a little bit of a worm party going on down low. Maybe we get to see some other leftovers that were perhaps not completely consumed by the worms over the past 12 days since we last fed them. Little scraps of stuff here and there. Nothing major. There's a good bit of moisture down low too. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to just sort of give the entire system a good little stir. Get some of that more damp material that I just excavated right out of the old feeding zone down here, or well, the feeding zone down here. And perhaps blend it in with some of the other materials that are elsewhere in the bin that are not quite as damp. That I think would help sort of equalize the moisture throughout the system, give everything a good fair shake at seeing a bunch of worm traffic and get broken down. So yeah, why don't we do that? It's kind of cool bumping into like nice big mounds of worms all over the place. Every handful that I've excavated so far has had a pretty large number of worms hanging out in it. But the stuff is a little bit muddy and a little bit sticky. I'm sure that's part of the reason the worms are all hanging out down there, is because it's so moist and damp. But it does seem to me like it wouldn't hurt to just sort of combine all that more damp stuff with other materials in the bin that might not be quite as damp. This too is a little chunk of corn cob. I'm not going to set that one aside with the others. In this case, I'm just going to chip it apart. But you know, why don't we kind of do like a circular sort of stir around. This will give us a good opportunity to bring in some of this material from the outer edges and blend it in with some of that nice damp stuff that we just excavated. These little guys are going to go for a nice little ride. Everyone's going to get a little bit displaced from where they'd been previously. Hopefully it doesn't send the worms into a tizzy. Some of this material is almost completely worm-free. Obviously the worms sort of favoring the material where the majority of the moisture is collecting. I'd like to see all the material getting a fair shake at worm traffic. So I think it's probably a good idea to get the overall moisture level of the system sort of equalized by blending everything together, and then this way we'll also get a chance to see even more worms. Although digging right down into the feeding area, that was clearly the place to go if you wanted to see worms, because there were quite a number of them there. Out here on the edges, not so much. But I think this is definitely going to help aerate the material, get all the damp stuff combined with some stuff that's not quite as damp. I don't think it's going to send any of the material into a uncomfortable level. I mean, even though some of the more dry stuff where there's not so many worms hanging out, even though that's not quite as damp as what we unearthed from the middle of the bin, it didn't seem to me like it was uncomfortably dry or anything like that. So, like over here is probably a good example. Similarly, it's on the outer edge, furthest away from where the feedings were getting administered. But good bit of moisture, good bit of worm population hanging out in it. So this is going to be a really good combining of the materials, and it also feels to me like here and there I'm just finding little pockets of material where there's still like little globs of maybe leaves or something, stuff that if it just sits there in a big pile matted up to itself, then maybe it's not going to, you know, get broken down as quickly as if it were just out in the open material. So hopefully what we're doing here is going to be beneficial in the long run to seeing this system to the finish line. And it also seems to me like as we're stirring and aerating and fluffing everything up, the entire level of the system's coming up pretty good too. Granted, we're going to have to backfill a pretty good sized hole over here, which will probably bring the overall level of the system down considerably when we're done, but it does feel to me like we're fluffing things up quite nicely here. Unearthing here too, pockets of material where there's not a whole lot of worm activity going on. So I'm sure blending in a little bit more moist material into that stuff is going to give it all a good opportunity to get a little bit more worm traffic than it might have had otherwise. So, alright, that's something I really don't do all that often. I go to other worm channels and I could see people doing pretty significant stirring around of the material of in their systems like that, you know. Here I'll just probe around, I'll dig around a little bit, aerate, but I've not really done anything like this recently where I've just sort of tried to combine all the material in the bin, blending it all around to equalize it, but I kind of like it. I like what we've done here. I don't know if it's necessary to do it in the other bin. It's only because this is the older bin that I'd really like to eventually drive towards completion one of these days, and I think it would be pretty beneficial to the system to have everything equalized as far as moisture goes, make sure there's no little pockets of hidden material that's not seeing any worm traffic, kind of consolidate any larger chunks of corn cob I encounter along the way to include it down in the feeding zone. So I think we've put these little guys through enough disturbance. Why don't we get the feeding in here for them and let them return back to peace, back up on the shelf. And I don't think I'm going to go all that deep here. I think we're going to just submerge the food a little bit and cover it up just a little bit. Instead of digging it a big deep hole, we're just going to kind of position it a little bit closer to the surface than we normally would. And then we'll be done in here. So let's see, I've got stuff here like these big chunks of cabbage leaves or stems, or somewhere in the middle, somewhere between leaves and stems, are these larger elements of a head of cabbage. And something tells me they're going to like these things. They're just big juicy bits of greenery. Here too, some cabbage leaves. I'm almost thinking this is the sort of stuff that's like ideal for a system where you don't want to see many leftovers, because stuff like this I suspect is going to get gobbled up 1, 2, 3. Even these like pieces of strawberry, yeah, a lot of it includes the leaves that came along for the ride, but little bits of yummy strawberry on there I'm sure the worms are going to appreciate too. I'm not sure what else we have here. Maybe a little bit of potato peel or something. I want to save some for the other system we're feeding as well, so why don't we proceed to giving them the coffee portion and returning the leftovers, right? We wanted to bring back the old coffee filter that had been the feeding zone indicator previously and get it down into the line of fire so that it too gets consumed by the wormies. I've got this feeling by it being right here in between the freshly added cabbage leaves and stems, and then having the coffee and worm chow sprinkled on top, because besides coffee I've got my worm chow here as well. I got a feeling that that coffee filter is not going to stand a chance for very long, being right there where all the worms are going to be cruising around, nibbling away at all these yummy foods. I got a feeling that that old feeding zone indicator is going to be toast in no time. So let's cover up the feeding zone here. Not quite as deep as we usually put it, but you know, if you think about the composting worms, they are generally surface feeders. Most people, not most people, but a lot of people do generally feed pretty close to the surface. Sometimes I do question whether I'm possibly submerging the food a little bit too deep for the wormies. perhaps they'll appreciate having the food a little bit closer to the surface than normal. And back on the plastic. Somewhat larger plastic than had been used out here previously. I'm just going to try to make sure it covers as thoroughly as I can get it. And now we can move on to the younger system. So now, I don't know, I think I might have said earlier too, I don't know if we're going to go through that whole rigmarole of combining all the material in the system and stirring it all around the way we did in the older bin. Here in the younger bin, I believe we've got a little bit more time. Like I said in the very beginning, we've got a 60-day advantage in that older bin over this younger bin. So we've got about a 2-month head start in there. So in here, I think we can stick to a somewhat more routine approach to tending to the bin. Maybe look around a little bit on the edges. Open up the feeding zone, give them today's share, and call it a day. So let's get started. Before we dig down into the feeding zone, why don't we just do the quick examination and aeration of the outer edges. There's lots and lots of castings in here, and as you can see, same story as the other bin. Lots and lots of leaf stems. And I think in both systems at this point, no more leaves. All bedding we use is going to be paper-based. Some sort of a paper or cardboard material, stuff that's probably going to be broken down in no time compared to how long it takes for leaves to go. And it's not even so much the leaves, it's just the stems of the leaves that seem to take quite some time. I'm almost wondering if these might have been the systems in which we just made the decision last time to just skip tilling up the outer edges, because those outer edges felt a little different than they normally do for some reason. Perhaps last time all we did was just plop open or, dig open the feeding zone and give them their portion and call it a day, because somehow these outer edges feel like they're a little bit more settled and even a little bit more dry than what I'm used to. So I'm glad we're giving them a little stir out here at least today, because even though they would probably be fine if we didn't, I just like to try to introduce a little bit of air, if nothing else, down into the outer edges of my systems. And there is a lot of nice casting material piling up out there, I must say. Things look really good. With the slightly larger plastic on here too than had been on here previously, there was still some dry material near the edges, but it does feel like the larger plastic covers are helping a bit, which is also kind of nice to see. So now I think we can get right into excavating the feeding zone and giving them today's portion. Some of this just feels so muddy and clumpy, You could see as I try to move some of it aside, it remains as like a big boulder moving around. It almost does feel like it would be good to blend in some bedding material. Kind of makes me wish I had some leaves to throw in here, but I think we're better off without leaves at this point. I'm not going to sweat it. We're just going to let it continue as is. We'll just open up a nice big hole down here in the feeding zone, get some of these little wormies out of our way. Whoa! There is a pretty serious worm party happening over here. Oh man. These little guys are lively, alright. Looks like the napkin we put in there last time is still holding up pretty good too. That was funny how that piece of paper just gradually, ever so slowly, slid off my hand there. So yeah, we gave them very similar bedding last time as what they're going to get this time. And I can almost guarantee that if we went fishing around again, we could probably pull out another massive handful of worms just like that again. This is definitely a fun system with a lot of worms living in it. Almost makes me feel like we should probably go get my bedding supply, no? Maybe I should boost their bedding a little bit. What do you think? Yeah, you know, I do believe that in this case, I don't want to kind of get into a pigeonhole or believe that what's good for the 60-day older bin is good for this bin, even though maybe withholding bedding in that system makes good sense, doing so here might be a mistake. So I'm definitely going to go grab my little box full of prepared bedding, and we're going to give them a nice little boost to their bedding before we plop in today's food. So let me go get that now, and then we can feed them. Here too, the moisture level seems quite high, otherwise it wouldn't be sticking to my glove the way it does. So I just wanted to make sure I'm not going to be transplanting a bunch of worms into my bedding supply here. I'm really running low. I'm wondering if it makes any sense to hang on to what is remaining in here. You know, I'm going to hang on to it just in case I have a particular need for even a little bit. Probably wouldn't hurt to keep around that little remaining amount that's over there. And then we've got some leftovers we can plop back in. We've got the old feeding zone indicator. Let's return that to the system. We got some yummy veggies and some coffee. So let's see how that looks when we get it in here. Doesn't seem like much. Yeah, it is a little bit of a skimpy feeding, but that's okay. I guess we could always come back at some point in the near future and give them more. This looks like a piece of carrot that still hasn't even been consumed yet. Must have been pretty good sized for it to still be here. Yummy carrot. So let's get this feeding wrapped up. Give them the portion of coffee we bought down here for them. Get whatever leftovers we've got resting here off on the side down into the feeding zone. A little bit of my worm chow, and almost forgot, we've even got some supplementary bedding here in the form of some pieces of paper that need to be composted as well. Perhaps this stuff would have been a little bit better off right down in the feeding zone rather than out here so close to the surface. I wonder if perhaps we can increase the interest in this stuff a little bit, maybe, by sprinkling some of our worm chow onto it. Hopefully that gets the worms to come out and work the stuff down rather than us having to come back here next time and find a huge pile of paper sitting there waiting for us at the end. Alright, definitely a fun bin. Lots and lots of worms living in here. They seem to be doing a really nice job. And for now it looks a little bit, I don't know, a little bit to me like there's a good bit of work to be done as far as all those leaf stems go. But I got a feeling once those leaf stems all start breaking down nicely, we're going to have ourselves a real nice batch of castings in here. So the moisture level, even though it's a little bit high, I don't see the harm in it remaining that way. So I'm going to put the covers right back on as thoroughly as we found them when we got in here. Try to maintain the moisture level in here so that the worms feel comfortable exploring pretty much any portion of the system. You know, perhaps right around the very, very edges of the plastic. Maybe we'll see a little bit of dryness going on, but for the most part, underneath the plastic, we're going to have a nice damp zone where the worms can come feed, hang out, wander around, and feel really at home no matter what part of the bin they're in. So I think that's it. We're pretty much done here. Get the covers back on. And after that, the only stuff remaining is cleaning stuff up and putting stuff away. But you know, that stuff's boring. So I'm not going to keep you around for that. Before I go there really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, As always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.